when I was accepted, I thought I felt pretty damn proud to become a Marine.
And did they send you to boot camp then?
Yeah, boot camp in Parris Island, South Carolina, for a boot camp training.
How long did that last?
Well, at that time, the war was going on pretty good, World War II, and they needed some warm bodies overseas, I think. So they cut our training short by 2 weeks, which we had probably about eight weeks of training.
And you joined what month and year?
I enlisted December 2nd, 1942, and was sworn in December the 14th, same year.
Okay. Do you remember any of your instructors in boot camp, what they were like, or their names, or anything special about them?
Yeah, our drill instructor was a no good son of a bitch.
You remembered what his name was?
His last name was Schutt, S-H-U-T-T, or something of that nature.
Why didn't you like him? Because
he was tough. He was tough. Oh, he made our life miserable. I met him later in Oceanside, California, before we shipped overseas. And I often said I'd kill the son of a bitch when I found him. And when I found him, I bought him a drink.
Okay, great.
Well, our Saipan on the Marianas, as we drove the Japs back to one end of the island, we kept moving up behind them. And the civilian people that were on the islands, the Japanese had convinced them that we were the barbarians, and we were going to kill everybody. And they believed it, the natives believed it so much that when they got to the other end of the island, was a big steep cliff and nothing, rocky beach down below. And these people who actually threw themselves over, take the kids and the wife and themselves and throw them over. And we had Japanese-speaking people out in the ocean. They got them out there as soon as they could, and to try to talk to the people and tell them to, give up. You're not going to get hurt. We're the good guys and all that kind of stuff. But God, they just about killed all the natives that way. And for those that wouldn't jump, the Japs would shoot them and throw them over. We lost a lot of men too. But one of the things I remember vividly, I tell this every once in a while, but after we had secured the island, we were bivouacked in a big open field with sugarcane fields on 3 sides of us. Sugar canes that are about 10, 12 foot high stalks, you couldn't see through them. And they had dirt roads to and from. But I was sick and tired of eating C rations or K rations. That's all we had in those days. And I remember about a quarter of a mile from where we were camped, I saw a bombed out house belonging to some native, and there were chickens running around. So I was carrying a .45 at that time, a pistol. So I said to myself, I'm going to go down there and get me 1 or 2 chickens. That's what, tired of C rations and K rations. So I went down there with 2 clips of ammunition, 9 rounds on each clip. And I got as close as I could, and I shoot, and I missed. I emptied both clips and never hit a chicken. And I was just 10 foot from them.
Be good that the Japanese weren't chickens. We'd have never won the war.
No, they were regular chickens. Anyway, after I had exhausted the second clip of ammunition, I realized, what the hell am I doing out here? The sugarcane fields all around me, and I'm out here all by myself.
That wasn't real
And
simple.
I got scared, and I
Well.
says, "You dumb shit, what are you doing?"
Yeah.
So I took the second clip out of the weapon and put it in my pocket, and I pulled another one out, the first empty one, and I shoved it in there and pulled the slide back, as though I had to, and I held it up there, so looking around like that, so if there was any Japs watching.
They thought you were loaded, ready.
So I quick got my ass back down the road, back into the area. The next day they flushed 2 Japs out from underneath that house,
Oh my.
but they were unarmed.
Wow.
And then we were bivouacked in that area after we secured the island for 3, 4, 5 days, and in the middle of where we were camping, our cook set up his camp stove and the trailer and stuff like that, the GI cans for washing your Met gear and stuff like that. And this cook was out there with his Marine Corps dungarees on and had a white t-shirt. All the rest of us had green t-shirts. He was busy working around getting the meal, getting the breakfast ready, and all of a sudden, out of one of the sugarcane fields, a bunch of Japs, about 11, 12 Japs, came out of this cane field. The Jap officer had a sword, and for some unknown reason, there was very few weapons among the enlisted personnel, but they had hand grenades. And the Jap officers come out into the field, and all his men around him, and they started popping hand grenades around, like that, and everybody was sound asleep yet. It was, just practically daylight. And so this Jap officer spied, the only thing he saw was that cook with the white t-shirt out there in the middle of the field. So this Jap officer went for this cook, and the cook saw him coming, and he went around to put his trailer and his equipment between him and his Jap, while the others were throwing hand grenades. And eventually, some of us woke up and crawled out of our little pup tents and woke up to what was going on. We realized what was going on and started knocking off the Japs. The officer got up to the cook tent, or cook trailer, and like I said, the cook put the trailer between him and the Jap went around one way and the cook went around the other way, and the Jap following him, just getting as close as he could and taking swipes at him with his sword. And we stood there watching this for I don't know how many seconds, and there's the poor guy running for his life, and we're dumbfounded, and then all of a sudden some guy dove back in his tent and got his rifle and shot the Jap. But that got into Stars and Stripes magazine.
Did it really?
Yeah.
I'll be darned.
Obviously, you're not a big fella. How much did you weigh when you were captured? And
Originally, when I was probably just in my normal weight was around 165 pounds, 65 pounds. Most of the time we was prisoners, I probably weighed about 110 to 120 pounds. Most of that time, but I've seen many people get what they call berry, and their ankles would, or feet would swell up, and sometimes the guys' ankles would swell up real big, you know, from beriberi. And there's no way as this malnutrition was all it was caused by. I had my feet swell up, but not as bad as a lot of them.
How did your brother fare? Was he with you? Was your brother with you all the time?
We pretty much stayed together most of the time in the same camp, barracks. We was in the same barracks. We wasn't on the same detail to go out and work. We never went together much that way. They'd tell who they wanted to go, but basically I was pretty much with him.
And what kind of details would you do? Was it? It wasn't like working in the mines or anything, or?
Well, we built that mountain course, dug the canals, and that on that where we had that alcohol dump where they stored the alcohol. But eventually, when things got when American forces began to work their way back through the Pacific and started getting close to Shanghai and China, why they moved us into, they took us, put us on a train, and they took us up to what is now Beijing, was Nanking and Peking at the time. But we went inland on that train to Nanking, and then we went right straight north up to Nanking, and the big barracks up there. They had a big, what looked like a hay barracks to me. I think they had their straw for some reason for their animals or something, but they put us in that, and they dug a trench out in front of it for our toilet, and we stayed in that thing for 30 days, almost, right at the money. But anyway, the flies got so bad, when we were sleeping on the cement floor with some hay on it. Flies got so bad that you couldn't eat your stew without eating flies too, because the toilet was right out there in front of it, open. But then we stayed there for 30 days. Then they loaded us back on a train. We went down through Korea. We stopped in Seoul, Korea, and they gave us some rice and some stew. We went on down to Peking, or
Busan?
no, little Busan, Korea. We stayed there for about 2 weeks. And finally they loaded us on another boat, old cattle boat. I'm getting bad. And we went across to Japan, across the Sea of Japan from Korea. We crossed over to Japan, southern end of Japan. We unloaded there, put us in an old theater for overnight, and then they put us the next day. They loaded us back on a train, and they took us, a portion of us. They took the portion I went with about 150 guys, and they took us through from southern Japan right up through Tokyo and Yokohama, and went through those towns, clear up to the very northern end of Japan. We got on a little old mining train, or little cars, mining cars, went way back into the mountains to what was an open pit iron mine. Out of this open pit iron mine, they had a trolley car that went over the hills, down through the gullies and over the hills to smelters at that time. So we would load these out of this open pit mine. We would load these box cars or these trolley cars up, and they'd load up and they'd take them over the hills to do the smelters. But anyway, in the boxcars they put us on to move us from Shanghai. They take a boxcar and they, you know how a boxcar is built, there's two doors on each side? Well, they'd put a fence right here, and the guard would stay in the middle of that, and they'd put us in the ends of that. And we just packed in there like a bunch of sheep. And we could hardly lay down, just kneel down and sit down. But anyway, that was the way that was the transportation we had. All the boxcars was all shot full of holes, so we knew that our planes had been riddled in them at some time or another, so.
How did they treat you physically, other than the fact that the food wasn't very good and very much of it?
Well, we had one little interpreter, Ishihara, and he was one mean little dude, I'll tell you. He was raised or educated in Hawaii, so he knew American customs pretty well, and he talked pretty good English. But he was one honor little devil. He had a quirt, a horse quirt. You know what a horse quirt is? Well, he had that in his saber. But if he didn't like you, or anything that you done wrong, he'd wrap you with that quirt around your head or back or anything you want to take a whirl at you. Basically, there was a lot of guards that was they're trained to be mean, you know. They'd jab you with the butt of their rifle or whatever they could do with it. But there was some guards I think would have been about half human if they would have had the opportunity to be, you know. But basically they were pretty strict and pretty hard on you. If you done something that they didn't like, why, they found a way to kick you or get to you. I never forget one time when we were still in China, and our airplanes got to the point they was coming in pretty regular. Right in the middle of the night, they routed us all out and took us out on this big field and told us to lay down, that the airplanes was coming. They kept saying the airplanes was coming, and the bombers would be there. So anyway, we laid down, but they'd come around and if you raise your head up, they'd butt your head down with their rifle or step on your head and push it down in the ground. So they were pretty severe little guys.
Well, they didn't. They treated you bad if you showed any emotion because the Americans were bombing and strafing. Is it?
Well, of course, every time America would bomb us or our planes would come in, why, that would make them severely mad, you know, and they had a reason then to boot you around. So they'd cut our food off or do most anything they could do, you know, to get to you. So.
In other words, they didn't really need a whole lot of reasons or excuses to...
They didn't have to have a reason. They did do it, yeah. Yeah. But I remember the last, I think it was the last summer we was in Shanghai, they decided they was going to make us plant a garden. So out about a half a mile from our camp was a old Chinese graveyard. So they made us go out there and dig all these old graves up and fill them in, a lot of big old tombs, you know, old Chinese, rich Chinese, I guess. We filled all those old tombs in and leveled that off and planted beans. And that fall, why, they harvested the beans, and they had pretty good harvest. The Japanese took almost all of them, but they did give us a few feeds of beans. But anyway, that was quite a project, because the Chinese, the Japanese hated the Chinese as bad as they hated us. But the Chinese see us digging up that graveyard, why they was very disturbed, you know. And they'd stand out there way off there and shout at us and wave their horns at us, and, you know, they're trying to get us to stop digging up the graves, I guess. Of course, we had no choice, but
No, you wouldn't have had a choice on that.
didn't have no choice.
Obviously, you would have rather been somewhere else.
You're right, you're right.
So, you were in Japan, northern Japan, working in this
Iron mine, yeah, open. Was extremely steep mountains, and they had an enclosure, a bank, barracks on one side of the mountain, and then on the other mountain was the iron mine. And we would march down from this barracks down to the bottom and back up to the iron mine every day, and we'd fill the trolley cars, or I can't think of what the name of them things is, but gondola cars, and this thing went from that mine down through down the valley and then up over the other mountains, so we could see the ore cars going through the mountains that way. So we done that, we worked that daily, but then finally, when war began to get pretty well, we knew it was coming to an end sometime. I'm going to go back to Tokyo and Yokohama. When we was on the train coming through the cities, they pulled the blinds on the trains and they told nobody to look out. Absolutely forbid you to look out. But as we went through those big cities, which was big city, they was completely demolished. You'd see smokestacks sticking up here and there, parts of buildings here and there, but it was just a shamble. Everything flat. So we know that America was getting pretty strong. In fact, about every day the sirens would blow. We'd hear them blowing, so we knew that they was bombing at that time. But anyway, when we got back to that mountain, why we worked there probably not very long. But one day, why the Japanese, like I said, come in, and he told us, one of the soldiers said that they dropped a bomb that never stopped going off. And if America dropped any more of those, they was going to kill all prisoners. But anyway, then in a few days, why, we went to bed one night, and the next morning, why, we got up and there was a bunch of businessmen there and no more soldiers around any place. And they said that there was negotiation for peace, and we stayed there. They said we'd have to stay there in the camp until make arrangements to get us out of there. But there's about a half a dozen of us decided we was going to hike out of the mountains. So we started hiking out.
So you're in Paris and you're helping out at the large hospital there, and the 95th Army Hospital, though, the General Hospital. Did you get another assignment?
Yes, we did, but you're skipping one of the most dreadful parts of my whole time when you said you get to Paris. It took us 4 days and 4 nights to get to Paris, which usually would take about 2 hours or less, because we got on the first train that they were able to fix tracks for to get to Paris. Got up in the middle of the night, got all the nurses in one car, and it was like a dining car, so you sat at tables about 3 on each side, and we had one toilet. 110 nurses. We were on that thing for 4 days and 4 nights.
Why did it take so long?
Because the Germans shot at us all the time. And at night they did. So we had to keep our heads down below, heads on the table, because the windows were only so about about so high. And we had no food. The French would run out in the fields and bring us wine and bread. It was just terrible. You can imagine the dirtiness, everything. And we kept going. We couldn't get to Paris. We'd go off here and we'd go off there and sit in the fields. Or one time, the general sent the GIs out to steal food on the side of the station. I don't know if he had permission, but probably not, because I don't even think they knew where we were ever. But we got to Paris. You asked me something, then I had to tell you that. That was about
Yes.
the worst time we had.
So, being shot at by the Germans, did any of the nurses?
Single people, you know.
Did any of the nurses get
No,
wounded?
none
or-
of us got hit.
What were your emotions?
Well, we were scared.
Scared for 4 days, or at least 4 nights?
Well, yeah. But we were so glad when we finally got to Paris.
And how long did you stay there?
Well, we were there because Patton's army kind of slowed down a bit. I don't know, it might have been a couple of weeks because we worked several, I think we worked at least a week there at the other hospital, but before that we had a chance to do some things, see some sights and so on.
Any favorite memories of the sightseeing?
Wasn't exactly a favorite, but one of the things you're supposed to do in Paris, if at that time, was to have a Chinese pedicure, which I did, and that was the other horrible thing that happened during the war. I have very ticklish feet, and it never occurred to me. And that's the thing I remember about Paris. Isn't that ridiculous?
So, from there you went where?
Well, we were ordered to Metz.
Okay.
Metz had fallen. And we got up to a certain place close to Verdun. And we were almost at Metz by the time we got to Verdun. And we were told we had to get off the train. We could hear bombing or artillery shots from Metz because Metz fell back. And here we were supposed to go there. So we got shunted off to way up north, maybe 4 or 5 miles north, off a road in a wheat field. All in tents, unexpectedly, the entire 95th General Hospital. And it was a very rainy fall. So we were just soaking wet. And by that time we had no candles and no flashlight bulbs. So it was pitch dark all day in that tent. You can imagine how that was demoralizing. So the general decided we'd have to train out in the mud. So we'd get out there in the rain and the mud, and our boot, I remember one time we were right-lefting in that deep mud, and my boot came completely off, and I stuck my foot in the deep mud because you couldn't have it tight enough to keep that mud from grabbing. That was another very bad time for us. They actually lost us. That's what we thought. I don't think the general told everybody that, but we were assumed to be completely out of communication sitting out there. I think we were there about 10 days before they found us and ordered us back a little bit to Bar-le-Duc. which is where we set up our hospital.
And so that's a small village.
Bar-le-Duc is an old village, and bar means an upper shelf, landscape-wise, where the Duke lived, Bar of the Duke. And it's a central place. It has the cathedral for quite a large area there, the Bar-le-Duc Cathedral. And then down below is this quaint little town, delightful, with a lovely river that flows through it, all lined with trees and path on either side. And we were out beyond a little bit in an old army facility, which was converted.
And any evidence of war damage? Had there been any battle in that particular area?
No, not on the way to Verdun. I didn't recall seeing it, at least from the train.
And not at Bar-le-Duc?
And not at Bar-le-Duc.
So you set up the hospital again. And were there any major differences in your duties as to what you did there compared to what you did back in England?
Well, we had to go into Paris headquarters instead of to London. We were under the aegis of each of those. So in France, we were under the Croix Rouge, and I, by that time, had been named the head recreation worker because the woman before me had left. And so I had to go in there and get supplies and orders once in a while. That was different. And the other thing that I had to do was a lot more scrounging to get materials. And that was different because we'd go to old fighting areas. The GIs would take me out in a Jeep and would help me, and we'd lift out parts of airplanes and stuff that had been stuck into the cave or wherever the supply thing was, and we could get old materials, wood and different kinds of metals and stuff to use in our craft shop. And then I had to work with the hardware store in Bar-le-Duc to get tools and things, which I didn't have to do in England. So that was about the only thing different, I guess.
So you actually went to the hardware store and bought?
We had to go and buy certain things. One of the plagues of being Red Cross was that when we'd arrive at a new place, we wouldn't necessarily get our record players and equipment for quite a long time. And so that's when I would go and
Elliott was a bad spot for us. We went in there and set up their guns and started firing, but then we immediately began to get counter battery, and I'll never forget that I saw this foxhole, and there were two guys in there, so I didn't jump in there. I jumped into the next one, and a shell hit in the one that I was going to get into, and one man, they never even found his dog tags. It's hard to believe, but there's no trace of him. And the other person lived. So, and then of course, we moved out of the air court. We had to get out of that position. It was a terrible spot. It was up in a knoll, kind of a rocky area. And we were getting good visibility in this French countryside, but we were also, getting counter batteries. So we moved out of there, and lo and behold, we went back in there again and got shot out of there again. And we lost a number of people there. And I think that was about the same time that 50 bombers, German bombers, came over our area. But they, you know, we had command of the sky, and they only dropped a few in the left. But that's a lot of bombers over here. But there again, they were going after the howitzers. And of course, I was no longer in the firing batteries. But we lost a number of people in that battery that I had been in. And in fact, there had been a fire in a little Quonset hut that had troops in it that also had ammunition in there, and terrible fire. And so the battalion commander had an awful lot of things to think about. He was so cool under fire. And I just also had the idea that he felt like he hadn't had another life, maybe Attila the Hunter or something like that, that he knew exactly what was going to happen to him, and he had no fear. And it was a tremendous experience working for him.
And just so I understand the term, what does it mean to direct the battery?
Well, that means that to tell them literally where to go.
Okay,
Yeah.
position them or whatever.
Yeah. And I was at that position where they were coming in, and all I had to do was just tell them to go up there, and that's all there was to it.
And each battery has a guy that directs them.
Yeah, I don't know if that happened all the time, but it happened here because this was a rugged place with lots of rocks and trees and so on, but it also had a terrific position to fire on the enemy, like a little round top or something. You know? Yeah.
Were you attached to Patton for a while?
Oh yeah, in fact we were in the Third Army. That was Patton's, and this was really a tremendous thing because he was very exciting, and there was a point where we were just on the move. I mean, we were shooting up the enemy, something awful. I mean, we saw tanks and trucks and horses. I'll never forget dead horses that had been shot. They still had a lot of horses. It's amazing for such a mobile army as they had. But so we would be riding on the turnpike, on the superhighway there, and that Hitler had built for us, Autobahn, and all this carnage. It was really something to see. But the thing that fascinated me the most was one night we were moving in the evening, and columns, long columns of American troops going, and we were told, okay, lights out, no cigarettes, no nothing. I don't know how the trucks were able to move, but they without running into each other. But on the other side of the Autobahn, German units going, and we were told, don't shoot, for God's sakes, let them go. They're going to be taken care of. They're going to get hit in the morning when they. And well, they sure did get hit. And so the next morning, we were going along. There were about a number of us in the truck. A number of trucks that were in the 191st. They're on the move with the howitzers, and the half-tracks pulling the howitzers. And all of a sudden, along comes, on the other side of Autobahn, along comes a motorcycle with you could see, we were told later there was a high-ranking official in there, and the driver, of course, and they started getting shot at, and they shot back and hit a guy in our truck, a fellow that originally was from Sweden, and they took him back to the rear, and he got captured by the Germans. And it was most unusual because you never knew, in a war, you never know what you're going to see next.
The lines aren't necessarily.
Yeah. Of course, these guys were killed, but there was so much confusion. They didn't know what they were doing, apparently. And that's obviously from the night before. You could see that there were these Germans trying to rushing back. To get out of the way. Patton's forces were just moving so fast. I don't think he even knew how fast they were moving sometimes. But of course, eventually they ran out of gas, and that's the only reason they didn't go all the way to Berlin.
Had to wait for the supplies to
Yeah.
Now you talked about one story. I sort of have to get it on tape again, so it's all in the same tape. About an unusual discovery when you were up observing how artillery shells had hit. Was that at Iroquois?
Oh, yes. Actually, this was a time, this wasn't at Iroquois. This was later because it was in the wintertime. And it was a real eerie feeling. Now, here again, this is one of the things, I went up with what they call the intelligence officer, one of the intelligence officers, major. They wanted to know, they could tell by the way the artillery was hitting the ground, the shells were hitting the ground, what direction the counter battery was coming from. And that was a dangerous job because we actually went into no man's land. And it was a real eerie feeling. It was very, very cold, wintry scene there. And it was definitely quiet. There was absolutely nothing moving. And we went up to this house, and we were just about ready to go in, and the stench was horrible. And of course, you had to be careful because there were booby traps all over. The Germans, when they left there, they defecated all over that place to make sure that there was no way that anybody could use that building. It was a terrible sight and a terrible odor. And but the thing that got me most was the deathly silence and being in no man's land. I mean, like we were the only ones there, But he got the information he needed and went back and then I don't know how things worked out after that, but undoubtedly they probably silenced the units that were firing on us. Because at that point we had pretty well command of the war, until the Battle of the Bulge.
The Germans did that so that no one could use that house.
Yeah. And of course, being really cold, I mean, to tell you, this was the coldest winter that they had on record. And so it naturally was quite a disappointment to any American unit that came in there.
So Battle of the Bulge is next, right?
Yeah. Well, we were in a kind of a fluid situation there right at the French border, the German border. And it was a place called Bleisbrücken. Now that's a German town, but of course it's right on the border. So there were people there that were very uneasy. Because the Germans would be there one day and the Americans come in the next. And, you can imagine how scared the French and the German people were. And this particular area, there were German people living there. And so we got word that we were going to be leaving, that there was trouble. Actually, there was trouble. We didn't know it at that time, but it was the Bastogne thing, the Battle of the Bulge. And so, of course, we had known that there was, we were beginning to lose some troops because they were going through our outfit and saying, you, and you're in the infantry now. And I lost a good friend that way. And in fact, I was told that the next time they came in, I'd have to go. I mean, the next time they came in looking for cannon fodder, that's what it was. Because an artillery guy didn't know very much about being an infantryman. So anyway, we were told, hey, we're going to get up and go. And we're heading towards the Ardennes. And so that's 191 miles. But the thing that really got me was those poor civilians. They knew that they were going to get it one way or the other again, you know, and they were going to get it from the Germans because they were going to be moving in as we moved out. That's how fluid everything was. And so we had a march to the Ardennes, and it was 191 miles, and it took several days to get there because our tracks were breaking down. They simply couldn't take that going so fast over a period of time like that. So on the way, we didn't know what we were going to be facing. On the way to Bastogne, all of a sudden, the sky opened up, and there were American planes. The sun shone through, and everybody cheered because they knew now the Germans would be taken care of. Once we had a chance to do some bombing, and that's exactly what happened. The tide had changed, and Bastogne had been retaken by the time we got there. And so we didn't really have a lot of action there like the infantry would have had. Sometimes we were a little bit too close to fire. But the thing I'll never forget was because I had seen the movie Patton, and the sign, Bastogne sign, was half covered by snow in this movie, and that's exactly the way I saw it. And at the movie, I could literally smell the barns, the straw burning, the fires. Some of these homes, they actually had animals in the lower part of the house, cows, and the smell, the putrid smell of the aroma of all that burning flesh and everything else. It came back to me when I was watching the movie. But we got out of that pretty well. I got my Ardennes stripe, but really I can't say that.
How did you feel about your husband leaving?
Well, I didn't want him to, but it's just one of those things. He was a young man; he had to go.
What was it? Did you write letters? How did you stay in contact with him?
Every day.
You wrote letters every day?
Yes, sometimes twice a day.
That must have been nice for him to receive.
Yeah, especially after he was overseas. He was stationed in Burma. In India for a long time, but he said he didn't get them every day. When he would get them, he'd get a bunch, like 10 or 12 at a time.
What kind of? I know you all weren't allowed back then. He wasn't allowed to tell you too much about what was going on with his duty.
No.
So what kind of things would you write to him? What would you tell him about?
Oh, I told him what was happening here at home.
You're keeping him in touch with things.
Yeah, because his mother didn't feel like writing, so everything she wanted said, I would say. His family, my family, and I did most of the writing. My mother wrote a little, but not much because my brother was in too, and she wrote to him.
Did you write to anyone else, any other friends? Or
Oh,
family?
yes. I wrote 6 or 8 letters a day. All my ex-classmates, cousins, friends.
It's just a job itself, writing that many letters. How did it make you feel to write those letters?
Well, sad, I guess. I'm glad that I was able to do something for them.
Did you lose any classmates that were over there, or any friends that didn't make it back?
Yes, I did.
It must have been difficult.
Yeah, a couple of them.
But your husband returned safe.
Mm-hmm. My husband and my brother came home together.
What was it? Do you remember when they actually came home, when they made it?
Mm-hmm. They came home the day before Christmas Eve, in what, 45, I guess. Yeah, 45.
Oh, that must have been nice, right before Christmas.
Mm-hmm. Especially they came together.
So how'd you feel? It's been a couple years since you'd seen him, right?
Yes, it had been. Mm-hmm.
What was that like?
Well, it was the greatest Christmas gift anybody could want. So we had a big family gathering Christmas Eve.
And you knew he was home for good at that point?
Oh yeah, they were both discharged.
So when you wrote the letters about telling your brother or your husband what was going on here, what kind of things were going on here?
Well, just life in general. I wasn't going to tell them anything bad. And James and I had a daughter by then. And she was born in 44, April of 44. And I sent him pictures. Well, I sent my brother a picture too also. And told him what she was doing, how she was doing.
And you had family around you to help?
Oh yeah, I had plenty of family.
That's great.
My family and his family.
We talked to a few people who were also civilians in Lexington during World War II, and one of the things they stressed to us as younger people, that Lexington was much smaller then, and much more family-oriented maybe in a way than it is now. Families looked out for each other.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that had any significance in just fighting the war at home and helping out with the war, being supportive to the troops?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And for a while I left and went to Wright Field to work. I thought I could help better by working. And I was there, though, less than a year because when I became pregnant, I was sick. I couldn't stand that long ride out to the field. I lived in Dayton. I had to ride the bus, and I mean the cattle bus. You know what that is? You stand. Nobody had any seats. We stood from Dayton out to the field. And we were just herded on that just like cattle, so that's what we call them, cattle buses. And it was just too much for me being pregnant, so I had to come home.
What was your job when you worked there?
Clerk typist.
And it was a what field?
Right.
Right.
You know it as Wright Patterson. Well, see, then it was just Wright because we had Wright Field and Patterson Field and Air Service Command. They were 3 separate fields then. It's in later years that they started saying Wright Patterson.
I see. And what did they do in general out at Wright Field?
That's where they tested the planes. Made them, I guess put them together. I know the parts probably weren't made there, but they put them together and tested them. And my building, Air Service building, was up on the hill, and we had to live with that. Planes flying over all day long, testing them.
What was that like to hear that?
It's terrible to have to sit there and listen to planes. I think that's part of the reason I was so nervous and couldn't stay. I've always thought that.
Yeah.
Because sometimes they would send us a warning that doesn't make sense. Your own plane's flying over, and they send a warning we're supposed to get under the desk. Now, what good did that do? If the plane hit the building, the desk and all was gone.
Wow. So that was all day long, just flying.
6 days a week.
But that was, what made you go out and take that job in the first place?
Primarily money. They needed the money. Wasn't in jobs here for an African American woman. Avon was here, but they wouldn't hire me.
So that was a place that you could readily get a job.
Oh yeah, they were asking for workers. Avon was too, but not me.
Were there other African Americans working out there at the right field?
Oh yeah, at right field, yeah.
But there weren't that, obviously there weren't that many places for you all to work.
No.
So you worked there for a year.
Not quite a year. I didn't stay the full year.
And you were a clerk, but you were
Clerk typist,
clerk
the way
typist.
that's what they call it. Because I was the only one in the office that could type except the supervisor.
Oh, okay.
See, people just, I guess they weren't teaching typing then.
Well, I served in the South Pacific majority of the time. I went to, after the war, I went to Japan, China, Philippines. But our division was stationed on Guam during the war.
Were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted. I was only 15 years old when I enlisted.
Why did you enlist? At 15, why did you enlist?
Because I ran around with a bunch of guys that were a couple years older than me, and they were all going into the service, so they weren't going to go without me.
You were 15. How did you get in at 15?
Well, I coerced my mother with bodily harm to sign the papers.
How did you get in at 15? So,
why did you pick the service?
Why did I pick the Marine Corps? Because everybody else around me were going in the Marine Corps, so that's why I went in the Marine Corps.
Do you remember the first day of that being?
The first day after I signed up?
Yeah.
Well, the first day, of course, was just going back home after you take the oath and everything down at the recruiting office. And then you get all your stuff together and you go down and get ready to get on the train and you leave. Of course, I had all my girlfriends down there to see me off, you know.
So what was it like on your first days when you got to, where did you go first?
The San Diego boot camp. And then when I went back, they shipped me overseas to Guam. And they put me in the 3rd Marine Division, 21st Marines Infantry Battalion.
What was your job?
Rifleman, they had kind of what's called a spec number, and I had a 745 spec number, and that was rifleman.
Did you see combat?
Yeah, we went to Iwo Jima, and they invaded Iwo Jima, I think it was the 19th of February, and I was in 3rd Marine Division. They had the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Marine Divisions that were in that invasion. The 3rd Marine Division was supposed to be held in reserve, but the next day they decided they had to commit at least a couple of infantry regiments. And I was in the 21st, and so they decided the 21st and I think it was the 9th regiments were supposed to go ashore. And so we got down into the landing craft, and they circled for a while and decided that the beaches were too messed up, cluttered up. They couldn't get people into shore. And so we went back and climbed back up onto the ship. And then the next day, bright and early, they got us into the boats again, and we landed on the 3rd day, which was the 21st of February.
So when you say cluttered out, the beaches were too cluttered out, what do you mean?
Well, with all the equipment wrecked and so forth like that. In other words, the landing craft were unable to get into the shore far enough so that they didn't dump you off in the water. And so what they did, they like I say, that was the 3rd day of the invasion. They got the engineers to clean it up that day so that they could make a pathway, you might say, so for the boats to get in, landing craft to get in.
Was there any firing as you were trying to get off the landing craft?
Well, not immediately. No, not immediately. They started bombarding us. That's where I got hit, probably about 15 or 20 minutes after we landed. And so I got taken back off and put back in the holding area with, I guess you'd call it I don't know where all the medics are and so forth, and waited, and they put you back into an LST, and they take you. Was taken out to the hospital ship, the USS Samaritan.
Where did you get hit?
The hip by bombardment from a shell.
Shrapnel?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So how long were you on the hospital ship then?
Well, we went from. They left before the famous flag raising that everybody knows about.
Okay, I was going to ask you about that.
I didn't even see that. So they must have left, like that was the 21st. I think the flag raising happened 5 days after they landed on the 19th. So we probably left the day before. And the ship went to Saipan. We were disembarked in Saipan to the hospital there. And then I was there for about 2 weeks, until they had me all sewn up and all this stuff, and I was fairly stable. And then they flew me on I think it was a DC-3, which was I forget the military name of that. But anyway, towed back over to Guam and went back into the hospital in Guam.
Oh, so you went right back there and expected to go back into the fight as soon as
Well, that's about April or May, I think it was May. They released me from the hospital, and they reassigned me back into the 3rd Marine Division, which was preparing for the invasion of Japan. So we were all doing combat training for the invasion of Japan.
Were there many casualties in the unit?
Oh yeah, they completely wiped out my whole company. We were practically wiped out, because when the Marines came back from Iwo Jima, I got permission from the hospital to go down and see my unit. And I went down there and didn't know anybody. They were all replacements, and I found out that most of them were either killed or wounded. And it turned out they ended up with over 6,000 dead and 18,000 total, well, 12 more thousand wounded on that engagement.
Can you tell us about a couple memories, your most memorable experiences?
Well, I don't know which would be the most memorable. It was all different. I mean, I'd never been in combat before. Didn't know exactly what to think of it, but it's pretty hectic. Everybody's running. You're trying to get up off the beach, and right there is got people yelling at you to get up and get going and things like that, and all the shells are going off and everything like that. I guess that's about the only thing that I can remember that was different. In other words, what?
Were you awarded any medals or citations?
Well, just the Purple Heart.
How did you get the Purple Heart?
For being wounded.
I graduated in April, became a part of the 302nd Squadron as the 332nd. The 3 squadrons of the 332nd Fighter Group completed their combat training. We were practically combat ready in the P-40 Warhawk, which is the aircraft the 99th entered combat in. The other 3 squadrons were trained, but then they said your mission is going to change. And you're going to do, instead of frontline support and interdiction, as we call that phase of flying, you're going to do patrol. So we did additional training in the P-39 Bel Air Cobra. Now this meant our mechanics also had to switch over, maintain a different aircraft, a different engine, and so on, and they did. And we left our training site in December of '43, going directly to Italy. And so while the 99th attached to white groups moved out of Africa, Sicily, then into Italy, we went directly to Italy, and we were doing harbor and coastal patrol out of Naples with the P-39, and so that was part of my experience. It was interesting that when I graduated, my instructor said, well, it's too bad they don't have a bomber program for you folks, he said that, because I think you'd make a good bomber pilot. Well, he didn't know, none of us knew that just a couple of months after him making that statement, they authorized the twin engine training there at Tuskegee. So they continued the single engine training along with twin engine training. But anyway, the 332nd began their combat in January of '44, flying the Bel Air Cobra. And I mentioned that there was probably one instance that you could say of integration during the war, and it came when the 99th was no longer attached to the 33rd under the command that didn't want them. They were attached to the 79th Fighter Group, and this commander was willing to use them right along with his own assigned squadrons, and that was during the time of the Anzio beachhead and the change of the war period there, and the 99th distinguished themselves there. Now, part of this history has a lot to do with command attitudes. Colonel Momeyer, the 33rd, didn't want the 99th. His reports reflected his attitude. They'll get them out of combat. They should be patrolling Liberia and doing something. Now, whether that had the effect of changing the mission of the 332nd Fighter Group to a patrol aircraft over a combat or interdiction aircraft, I don't know. But his reports and that attitude still persisted, and there was a hearing taking place in Washington on what should be the future and what should we do based on these reports that they were getting from Momeyer of the 33rd. But after the reports and the performance of the 99th under Colonel Bates and the 79th, and the fact that the result of the hearing was that we're only a few months into the war and you're trying to make a decision that really needs more time and more evaluation. And really the fact that the 99th accuracy in bombing and support of the frontline troops was equal to any other squadron, even though Momeyer was downplaying that performance. But anyway, the authorization was to continue. There was still the need for the units as we pursued the war effort. And by the spring of 1944, our bombers, now flying out of southern Italy instead of northern Africa, are flying deeper into the German-held territory, and their losses were very high on their early bombing missions to destroy Germany's war-making potential, and they needed escort for protection against the German fighters that were put up. And the 332nd Fighter Group in April of '44 was one of 4 groups picked to change mission and move from the 12th Tactical Air Force to 15th Strategic Air Force to begin escorting B-17s and B-24s. And the 39 was not the aircraft. It was not an interceptor. And so in combat, we switched to the P-47 Thunderbolt and moved from the Naples area to the Adriatic side of Italy, which would put us closer to hopping over the Adriatic and meeting up with the bombers and going to the various targets from France all the way over into Bulgaria and Romania, Germany. So the 3 squadrons of the 332nd Fighter Group began the escort work with the P-47 Thunderbolt. Again, a recognition that our mechanics were able to transition there in combat again, to a different engine and a different aircraft, but still maintained them in a way that we pilots could go do what we did, if you will. And then a very interesting aspect of the experience was that we only had the P-47. I think I had 9 missions in the 47, and they got then what we call a premier of the fighters, enough of them overseas that we transitioned from the P-47 Thunderbolt to the P-51 Mustang. Now that, we say it was the premier fighter because it had the range, a greater range, greater speed, and could operate at a higher altitude than the P-47. P-47 was a good aircraft, but had limitations because of its design, big radial engine, and its altitude capability. And so, if you ask any of the old fighter pilots what aircraft did you like best, it was the P-51 Mustang, and particularly when they switched from the Allison engine to the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. Made it a marvelous aircraft. Even to today, pilots that are flying those types of aircraft love the P-51. But we continued our escorting of the B-17s and B-24s from the Adriatic side of Italy. And the point I was going to make was that in July, as we got the P-51 Mustang, the 99th was moved from the tactical work they had been doing and assigned to the group. So we ended up with 4 squadrons in the 332nd Fighter Group. So we really had the largest fighting group under 15th Air Force from July on through the end of the war into the spring of 45 when the war ended. All 4 squadrons flying the P-51 Mustang, and from our own base. And our distinguishing mark, the fighter squadrons marked their aircraft for 2 reasons. One, so that as we approached the bombers and flew in and around them and protecting them, they could recognize that the squadron or the group insignia and know we were friendly aircraft, not enemy, because up at altitude, our aircraft don't look a lot different than the German aircraft, the Focke-Wulfs and the Messerschmitts that we were opposing. So it was a recognition for the gunners there, and that's also a recognition for we pilots, because as you get into combat maneuvering, things happen very quickly, high speed, and you'd want to be sure that the aircraft you had in your gun sights was an enemy aircraft and not one of your own, which could very, very easily happen. So we became the Red Tails, and that's so you see the model of the aircraft or the painting of the aircraft. The 332nd Fighter Group had the Red Tails. When like the others, one was candy stripes, somebody else had the checkerboard squares. So each group had their identification. And this became interesting because there were a few cases during the segregated environment in combat that some white pilots learned that the Red Tails were black. Many did not know till many years after the war that the Red Tail 51s were all black pilots. Another interesting aspect. So